Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, AI in the New Era, for putting together this program and kind of letting me have this opportunity to present my thoughts on GenAI, AutoML, and AI agents, um, and how they intersect together in the field of e commerce. By the end of this talk, I want you to walk away with three things: a clear mental model of how these three different paradigms fit together, a practical view of what to build first if you are early in your career, and kind of a sober view of like the ethical guidelines or the guardrails this work requires. We'll focus, like I mentioned, on the domain of e-commerce, and that is primarily because, in my view, it is one of the more demanding real-world test beds that we have for production AI. So let's get started. Right. So here is the shape of the next 30 minutes. We are going to look at the AI transformation through three lenses. First is kind of like the macro story of how AI is reshaping e-commerce operations and enabling personalization at a scale that was more or less impossible just 5 to 10 years ago. Second, we'll look at the three pillars that make it possible, the AutoML, generative AI, and the AI agents, and how integrated these three form something more powerful than the sum of their parts. The third, and I think to some of you importantly, is the career impact. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the practical implementation strategies that accelerate growth, particularly, like I said, if you're early in your data science career and looking to make your work more visible to the people who are hiring and so forth. I'm going to spend the bulk of this presentation on the second aspect, which is the three different pillars: generative AI, AutoML, and AI agents. We'll talk about the technology and the integration because, to my mind, that is kind of where the leverage is. But everything we discuss will keep coming back to this one central question: how do we take these capabilities and turn them into measurable outcomes that an organization can stand behind? The e commerce evolution. Let us start with the context. E commerce has changed shape entirely in the past decade. Online retail used to be fundamentally, a catalog with kind of a checkout button. You showed customers products, they bought them, and then you shipped them. The primary differentiation was price, selection of items in the catalog, and shipping speed. That world is gone. Customers today expect the three things that the catalog model simply cannot deliver, right? They expect personalization, they want recommendations and pricing and content that respond to who they are and where they are in their journey, right? This is not a one solution that fits all. They expect that personalization to be drawn from the enormous amount of data that their behavior generates, such as clickstream data, transaction data, social signals from any of their social media sites and so forth, returns that they have, any support interactions they have with your support agents and so forth. They expect that the resulting intelligence is actionable in real time. Things such as inventory decisions, marketing decisions, engagement decisions, they're all made in the seconds between page loads. The companies that are winning right now are not the ones with the biggest catalogs. They are the ones who have figured out how to translate that data into real-time decisions consistently at scale. And the underlying capabilities that let them do it is AI, specifically the integration of multiple AI paradigms working together. The three key technological paradigms that make it possible are AutoML, generative AI, and AI agents. So let's introduce briefly before we get into them in more detail. AutoML, which is the process of automating the machine learning pipeline itself, which includes feature engineering, model selection, hyperparameter tuning. And it makes machine learning accessible to teams that do not have deep specialists in every algorithm family, right? This is the workhorse of modern kind of data science teams or any any analytics teams nowadays. Generative AI is the creative layer. While AutoML focuses on kind of making predictions and so forth, generative AI is focused more on producing new content, such as text, images, conversations, or even synthetic data. For e-commerce specifically, that translates into like product descriptions that are written at scale, chatbots that actually understand the conversation, that actually understand intent, and also training data for edge cases that the real world is too rare to give us. And finally, the AI agents. AI agents are the autonomous layer. They perceive, they reason, they act. They can coordinate multi step workflows, hold context between decisions, and operate continuously without a human in the loop for every keystroke. This is the layer that most people are still kind of figuring out how to deploy safely, efficiently, and in general, just making it work together. What I want to kind of emphasize on this slide is that word, together. Each of these technologies is interesting on its own, right? But the real value, the kind of transformative value, comes when you wire them all together. And that is the central thesis of this talk. Let's go a little bit deeper into AutoML. AutoML democratizes data science, right? This is the basic promise of AutoML, that is democratization. The hardest and most time consuming part of building a machine learning system, which is kind of like, the figuring out which features matter, picking like the right algorithm, tuning it, those are all the parts that AutoML handles, right? Concretely, the four things that it handles is the feature engineering, where the system automatically identifies relevant variables in your data and transforms them into data format that the machine learning model can work on. To take, for example, text data, converting it into numeric data that the model can then use. Then the model selection, right? Instead of selecting just one algorithm, what it does is it models the data on a few different algorithms and just selects you the best one. And then the hyperparameter tuning, right? It's not just about finding the best model, it's also about tweaking the best model or tweaking the knobs that or tuning the hyperparameter for the best model and get you the optimal performance from that model. And finally, rapid prototyping, right? What used to take months or even weeks can now be done in hours. And that is an example of how far we have come as a field, that what used to take days or even weeks just a few years ago can now be done in days using automated machine learning, using higher compute, and so forth. So one thing I do want to mention before we move on is that I want to be honest about what AutoML is and is not, right? It is not a replacement for understanding, your problem. The best AutoML in the world cannot tell you whether you've defined your problem correctly, whether you've selected the right target variable, or whether your training data is representative of real world data, or even whether the metric that you optimized actually maps to business value, right? This is all things that are more or less human judgments, and they will remain human judgments. But once those judgments have been made, AutoML can then compress that engineering cycle of going from raw data and problem formulation to insights or decisions that you can make on that data, on that model, on that data. And that compression, in my mind, is what lets really small teams even ship at a scale that used to require, an army before. The second one is generative AI, right? Which is kind of like what I said, my creative intelligence at scale. Generative AI is the part of the story that has captured, the popular imagination today. And for very good reason, right? For the first time, we have a system that can produce coherent, useful, context aware content at a scale that, matches the scale of modern e-commerce. In our domain, this translates concretely into three high value applications. First of all is content creation. A single retailer, might have hundreds or thousands of SKUs or items, and each of which needs a description that is both unique, SEO optimized, and also aligned with brand voice, right? Doing that by hand is impossible. Generative AI now makes it routine. The natural language understanding part is the aspect of customer facing chatbots that do not just match keywords but actually understand what someone is asking in the context of their order history and even the broader catalog. And finally, the synthetic data generation. This is an underrated use case but also of high value. Most of the important e-commerce decisions hinge on rare events, things such as fraud, expensive returns, edge case, fulfillment failures, and so forth, right? There simply is not enough real world data to train robust models on these kind of cases. Generative AI lets us simulate them ethically and within kind of tested bounds so our other models become more resilient. The point I want to leave you with on this slide is that generative AI is not a standalone product, right? It is an ingredient. The value of generative AI comes from where you embed it in your existing workflows. Autonomous agents or AI agents are the third pillar. They are the newest layer of the stack to reach genuine production maturity. An agent, especially in the way I'm using this term, is a system that can perceive its environment, reason about what to do, and then act, all without a human supervising each step. Three things make agents different from the classical machine learning systems, right? First is multi step coordination. An agent can chain a sequence of decisions across search, pricing, fulfillment, and support, holding the context all throughout the way. Second is human level reasoning patterns. Agents can handle the ambiguous, context dependent scenarios that used to require a human in the loop, but not so much anymore. And finally, cross-work automation or cross-workflow automation. An agent does not need to live inside just one system. It can operate across systems from customer service to supply chain to marketing, the same way a senior operator would. One thing I do want to mention here is that with autonomy comes responsibility. So the more we let these systems act without supervision, the more careful we have to be about how we define what they're allowed to do and how we monitor what they actually do. And also, how we recover when they get something wrong. And we'll come back. At a high level, this is kind of like the slide I would like to have had, a few years ago. This is basically a very simple grid that maps each of these technologies against four dimensions: implementation complexity, time to value, the business impact, and then where we are in the adoption stage in the kind of like the broader market. So in terms of AutoML, the complexity is medium, very short time to value, high business impact, and most importantly, it's mainstream. There are no complaints about using AutoML in any industry, right? The second one is the GenAI, and if and one thing I do want to mention is if you're new to this field, if you have to start anywhere, then AutoML should pretty much be your primary starting point. Generative AI is the next level up from AutoML. In generative AI, it's a higher complexity. The time to value is longer than AutoML, so that's medium. It has very high business impact, and the adoption stage in today's world is that it's at a rapid growth adoption stage. Uh, People are it's very exciting. People are using it in many different areas, and the tools are also improving every quarter, right? So what are today's best practices might not even be relevant next quarter or next year. So just kind of stay close to the literature, kind of see how gen ai is evolving and so forth. Final kind of framework that we have is AI agents, right? These are very complex. They are still kind of being built. The tools are being built. The time to value is still kind of on the longer side. But if you get it right, the business impact is totally transformative. And in terms of adoption stage, it's very early adopters. Lots of tech firms are getting into AI agents. The other firms are slowly getting onto it, but still, it's very early days. And it is exciting, but also means that you bear more of the responsibility for figuring out what a good strategy there looks like. And then the finally, like the hybrid systems, this has the highest complexity, the to some extent long time to value. It has the maximum business impact, and this is just an emerging field. And this is the field of hybrid systems, where you kind of figure out how to merge all of them together. Let's look a little bit in the field of e-commerce, how all of these fit in. So here are the four main use cases that you can use AutoML in e-commerce. There can be many more, but these are the four kind of simple use cases that we have. The first is prediction, which is identifying which customers for yeah, are at risk of leaving. And what you can do is kind of identify the most high valued customers and target them for retention using either like a personalized email or offer or so forth, right? Then there is the behavioral segmentation, which is primarily clustering shoppers by intent and behavior, and not just by demographics, which is kind of more on the crude side. And then using these clusters to deliver experiences that fit. The economics of personalization only work when the segmentation underneath it is correct or honest. Finally, third case is the conversion modeling, where you are predicting which users are more likely to convert or buy, and you can prioritize your scarce resources such as ad spend, sales attention, premium support, whatever be the cases, and you can target them appropriately. You can only do this credibly if your prediction is well calibrated, which is kind of what AutoML is there to kind of really expedite. And finally, rapid optimization. You can do A/B testing of various different models without kind of restarting from scratch on the pipeline every single time. And this matters more than people think, because the biggest gains in production machine learning do not come from a single brilliant model, right? They come from many small improvements using different models, and the improvements kind of compound over time. That's AutoML. Now let's look at GenAI in e-commerce. On the generative side, four equally concrete applications. First is the auto-generated product descriptions, which are creating compelling SEO optimized copy across a catalog of any size, refreshed automatically as new products arrive and so forth. Then there is the conversational AI part, which is chatbots that handle complex queries with fluency and so forth. Recommendation explanations, and this is to some extent underrated. When a model suggests a product, the customer's next question sometimes is, why this one, right? And Gen AI lets us answer that in a way that is more natural to the customer. And this builds trust and gives us a window into getting answers from the customer about whether the recommendation is even the right one. Finally, inventory optimization. Generative AI has, in some sense, revolutionized how inventory optimization is done by moving from reactive to even proactive management, using real-time data to forecast demand, prevent stockouts, minimize overstocking, It analyzes unstructured data, right? Not just structured data such as sales and so forth, but unstructured data such as trends, weather, and so forth to dynamically adjust these inventory levels. And also automate, procurement and so forth. All these four do not replace human judgment at the strategic level, right? These are all about doing the routine work, at a scale and consistency that humans would kind of find it hard to do. Finally, the AI agents in e-commerce. AI agents bring in the highest order of autonomous intelligence, right? The simple loop on this slide, perceive, reason, act, right? Sounds almost trivial when you say it out loud, but each of these verbs hide a lot of work, right? So the perceive is the agent having to ingest signals from across different, businesses or different parts of the business, such as inventory system, pricing, current traffic, current support load, and so forth. Finally, and secondly, reasoning, right? It has to apply business rules, optimization objectives, learn patterns to decide what to do. This is the part where a lot of people are using both LLMs as well as machine learning models to kind of reason about the data. And then finally, the action, right? So now you've decided if part of the as part of the reasoning, if it has decided to actually change something in the world, such as adjusting a price, escalating a ticket, or reordering a SKU, and so forth. So then this is the place where they actually do it, and also do it in such a way that if we need to roll back, we can roll back if needed. Right? Dynamic pricing engines are a great example. Customer service escalations is another example. And again, these are like not really very sci-fi applications, right? They are in production today at many major retailers. The difference is no longer about whether you have agents or not, but it's about how well governed they are, how much data or they can perceive, and how much ability they have to act. Finally, a little bit about your portfolio, and I want to spend a couple of minutes on this. If you're early in your data science career, or if you're mentoring people who are, then this kind of section is for you, right? The job market for data scientists is crowded. Credentials alone, degrees, certifications do not really differentiate you, right? These what you want to use to signal to hiring managers and product teams is your ability to translate technical skills into real world business outcomes. And that's kind of where a portfolio comes into picture. A strong portfolio does three things, right? It proves problem solving ability. It shows that you've taken an ambiguous problem and converted them, or frame it, chosen a method and solved it and delivered a solution, and so forth. Same thing about bridging technical and business skill. It demonstrates that your models improve, conversion, retention, or revenue, and not just, RC curve, RSC scores, or something like that. Finally, these portfolios signal readiness, about how ready you are to contribute from day one, which reduces the risk of hiring, right? And I cannot overstate this last point. Hiring is fundamentally about risk reduction. The candidates, who get selected are those who the hiring managers perceive as being able to contribute from day one. So given that, some key portfolio projects for you to build are, my recommendation would be things such as recommendation engines. Again, these are not new. They have been there for some while, over past few years. So something you can start with. Find, but then beyond that, pick up things such as conversational AI, click-through rate optimization, web personalization, multi-agent systems. In terms of complexity, recommendation engines are probably the simplest that you can start off with, followed by click-through rate optimizations. Then conversational AI and web personalization are the next step up. In my view, it brings in NLP, it brings in some real time page optimization, customizations, and so forth. And then finally, the multi-agent systems, which are much more complex, and they are mainly there for senior people to handle and so forth. But you know, you don't need to pick all five. Just pick one, build it well, and document it as if you were presenting to your team, and let it speak for you. Right? The the kind of the matrix for this is the recommendation system. Like I said, it's one of the oldest. The complexity is low or medium, the relevance is high, the career impact is high, and generally recommended for beginners to mid-level. Same thing with click-through optimization. It's recommended more for like beginners, though the relevance and impact are both high. The conversational AI and web personalization are from mid-level to mid-senior level. The web personalization is at the highest level of impact. So I would definitely recommend you guys look at it. And multi-agent systems are very new. The problem with that is well-defined tools are not always relevant or not always easily available. Things will change. New tools will come in, and it's gonna as long as you have the basics and the concepts down, the tools can change and you could still adapt to it. The and that finally brings us to like the best practices, right? So first of all, the four practices that separate teams that ship reliable AI from teams that just ship demos is that these teams need to have like strong data governance, clear lineage, access controls, documentation standards established before model development even begins. Continuous monitoring, performance tracking, model drift, data drift, degrading accuracy in production all need to be monitored, and models need to be updated when the performance degrades. Ethical AI integration, ethical AI needs to be integrated early, and it helps kind of audit your data and your models for any problems that the engineering might face later. And quality assurance, right? Treat machine learning systems like software, rigorous testing, version control, and so forth. A couple of implementation considerations. Start with the business outcomes first. Define the success metrics, whether it's conversion rate, engagement, or whatever be the case. Then choose the algorithm. And finally, this kind of keeps the team aligned and make results defensible to stakeholders. Model interpretability is non-negotiable in e-commerce, especially when models influence pricing or recommendations, right? Stakeholders need to understand why a particular model prediction was made and not just what. And finally, the ethical impact of e-commerce, of using AI, right, in e-commerce. First of all, algorithmic transparency. Document how the model make decisions and communicate this to the user. Keep a clear eye on bias. Audit your training data for both any kind of biases in the data itself, and also especially look for demographic or behavioral skews. Comply with any data privacy constraints that you have, whether it be anything such as GDPR or CCPA or any other standard. But just remember, these standards are the floor, and you should try to respect users' privacy as much as possible. And finally, fair treatment. We want to ensure that pricing and recommendations don't discriminate against protected groups. The the last couple of things I do want to mention is that AI is becoming table stakes, right? The numbers on this slide are so, roughly 80% of consumers now expect personalized expectations, and people who have implemented AI are seeing like a 3x revenue uplift. And in 2026, AI is standard, right? It's the year by which AI driven personalization is projected to become baseline capability across all major platforms. And tools such as AutoML, GenAI have leveled the playing field and also kind of raised expectations across the entire industry and intensifying the competition between platforms of every size. Some future trends. I just want to briefly mention VR commerce, voice commerce, especially where you have more mobile phones rather than desktops. Predictive analytics beyond what we currently have, and IoT plus blockchain. These are all trends that are shaping what is going to come for e-commerce customers going forward, and something that you guys need to keep an eye on. Finally, the path forward, right? AI is not replacing the data scientist. It's to a large extent amplifying what great data scientists can do. And the practitioners who will lead the next decade of e commerce are those who combine the technical depth with strategic thinking and ethical judgment. The ability to connect technical decisions to business outcomes is highly relevant across e-commerce and other domains, along with those who are willing to slow down, ask hard questions, and build systems that are not just powerful but fair, transparent, and trustworthy are really going to be the people who excel. I would suggest you pick a portfolio that demonstrates all these three aspects and ship work that you would be proud of. I just want to briefly summarize with one slide before we go into Q&A, or rather answer these Q&A questions, I guess. So how can organizations effectively combine GenAI, AutoML, and AI agents for scalable innovation? The short version is layer them, do not choose between them. AutoML is your prediction foundation. GenAI is your content and inference layer, and agents are the orchestration layer that decides what to invoke and when to escalate to a human. Right? Start from a business problem, build a data foundation, and then scale through composition of small components rather than big monolithic models. In the second question, what are the key ethical considerations and best practices when deploying these technologies in real world environments? Short answer: transparency, bias mitigation, privacy, and fair treatment. You want to make sure that all of those are addressed. Thank you very much. That's kind of all my presentation for today. If you have any questions, please reach out to me via LinkedIn or email. And that's all. Thank you.